welcome back to the Ride On Network. Again, I'm Dave from Ride 615. So we talked earlier about the difference between road bikes and different types of road bikes, and then gravel bikes and cyclocross bikes. Now, that might have been a little bit confusing, but you ain't seen nothing yet till we start talking about the differences between mountain bikes. It should be pretty simple, but in reality, I mentioned two different categories of road bikes, and then the cyclocross versus the gravel. In reality, there's five different categories of mountain bikes. You've got a hardtail cross-country bike, you've got a full suspension cross-country bike, you've got an all-mountain bike, you've got an enduro bike, and you've got a downhill bike. You'll get the point. For purposes of this discussion, we're only going to talk about the cross-country, the all-mountain, and enduro. All right, so what are the differences? Flashback, same things apply. Prices go up based on the components, the frame materials and the components that are on there, or again, any combination thereof. So as I said before, the component groups, there's different families in road. There's different family of component groups in mountain as well, by SRAM and Shimano. In addition, family groups in terms of the forks and the shocks, and again possibly the addition of a dropper post, and then potentially driving up the price will also be the wheel set that's on there, aluminum versus carbon, and then as well the frame materials. So as I mentioned earlier, frame materials on mountain bikes are going to go from aluminum to composite to a higher grade of composite, all of which will drive up the price. So that's what's, again, in a mountain bike, you can get a good mountain bike starting at about $1,000 and start working your way up and easily spend $8,000. So that's, again, very much like the other ones. Those are the things that drive up the price. But now, why 5 different categories, and what's the difference between the bikes? All right, so the main differences you're going to see as you move from cross country to all mountain to enduro to downhill. You're going to see that the amount of travel, again, like road bikes, the geometry changes, the amount of travel in the suspension changes, and the angles of the forks change. So, and we could argue, if you want to get real technical, you tend to start putting wider wheels on them as you work the way up. But starting with a cross-country bike, and a huge shout out to Eric the Dutch Diesel for lending us his bike. This is a Giant Anthem, and this is more in the cross-country category. What you see is you're going to have probably about, on the fork, 130 mil of travel and maybe 4 inches of travel in the shock. You've also got a geometry that when you're sitting on the bike, you're going to tend to be vaulted a little bit more forward like this. Cross-country racing. This is the type of bikes that most pro riders, they'll either ride in pro races, cross-country races, will either ride a hardtail or an XC full suspension bike like this. So again, you sit a little bit more like this. And the angle of the fork is, you'll see, is a little bit more upright, and that's one of the things that puts you in that forward-leaning position. A little bit more climb friendly, a little less descend friendly. The next category we move up into, if you can see it, this is my Giant Trans. And I put this in I call it the all-mountain category. This, in my opinion, is really the best all-around bike. They're generally pretty good climbers, but they allow you to take on some pretty technical downhills as well. The difference between a cross-country bike and the all-mountain bike, now the travel here, generally if you're on a 27.5, you might be at about 150 mil of travel on the fork, and in a 29er, which this is, it'd probably be 130 mil of travel. And you're probably looking at somewhere about 5 inches of travel in the rear shock. All right? And then the angle of the head angle, if you will, and the angle of the front fork is out a little bit more compared to that of a cross-country bike. We say it's a little bit more slack, and that will put you in a little bit more of an upright position. It's much more downhill friendly, but then it is uphill friendly. But again, why I think that this is one of the better all-around bikes, not specifically the Trans, but it's just they're generally good all around because they do climb very well also. The next step up is the enduro bike, and enduro are basically races where they have to make it up a hill, and then they're timed downhill. They have to do laps, essentially go up. They're not timed on the uphill, but they're timed on the downhill. And the downhills tend to be a little bit more technical. So now what do you get with the enduro bike? Now you're looking at probably 160 mil of travel in the fork. You're probably looking at 6 inches of travel here, maybe 5.5 or 6 inches of travel in the rear shock. And I think it's pretty dramatic. You can see how much slacker the head angle is. Again, because these are time segments downhill, so this just allows them to be a little bit more aggressive on the downhill. And I think you'll see it too. The other thing is, as we move up, you're going to see a little bit narrower tire, a little less knobby, somewhere in the middle, then a pretty aggressive, wide, and knobby tire on the enduro bike. And then I did also mention the downhill bikes. That goes to a whole nother level. That means more travel, slacker head angle. Hopefully that's done a pretty good job of just categorizing the different mountain bikes. Before I go, I just want to say thank you to My Buddy's Bike Shop, my new house of worship, for lending us their Santa Cruz Bronson. That enduro bike for the purpose of this episode. And as always, if you have any questions, you can email myself at Dave at Ride On Network or Eric at the Ride On Network.